Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Besides the Revolution podcast. We've been doing a lot of these conversations about the JFK stuff, and I think it's been really fun to have this conversation. Super encouraged by Matt's conversation with us the last week, and he encouraged me to talk to a number of other people, one of whom is Mary Haverstick, and she's someone who's an author and somebody who got kind of, I think, pulled into this conversation about JFK in a unique way. So, Mary, really great to have you on the show. Would you kind of just explain a little bit of your background, talk a little bit about the book that you were writing about the NASA scientist, and let's kind of go from there.
Well, Aaron, I'm really happy to be here and happy that, Matt recommended me. I did get into the JFK case in a very strange and fascinating way. I'm a filmmaker, and I was basically doing what I thought would probably be my biggest and most epic project. I mean, I'd already worked with an Oscar winner, so it wasn't like I haven't been somewhat established in indie film. So it was my time to go for a big story. And I went for the story of an now older woman, but it would have been a period piece about how she fought to become an astronaut. She was the first woman to pass the tests that John Glenn and all the guys passed, the rigorous tests. And this woman was an ace pilot, and she passed the tests. She was put through the same rigors as the guys. She did very, very well, which kind of shocked the world when that was announced, because in 1960, I don't think we thought female pilots were going to perform, but she really did. And she'd done her homework. So I tracked this woman down because she'd fought for her rights to become an astronaut. She ultimately lost because, as we all know, it was Sally Ride went up in the 80s, not Jerry Cobb, the woman I was dealing with who tried in the 60s to become an astronaut. So she lost. It was an awesome story of a woman before her time. And she was a real cowgirl, too. I mean, she knew how to fly, and she's cool. So, of course, I sought her out. She was a recluse. So I somehow got through to her while she was down in the Amazon jungle. I tracked down her story, worked with her for 2 years. I was interviewing her. I had the line in, and Hollywood had tried to get her and failed. So I just kind of lucked out. I was really far along casting my movie. And I tell this story in my book, which I should mention is a woman I know. This is the book, and that's what I titled it because I got to know her. She is so complicated. I was visited as I was just about ready to cast the movie by, I thought it was befriended by a federal agent who seemed to be giving me these warnings that there was something wrong with my movie idea. And I'm like, what could be wrong? I'm working with her. So that little fleeting alliance or, encounter with this federal woman made me look into it. Like, is there something wrong with my movie? I mean, she seemed to be warning me. Googled it. This is like chapter 1 of my book. And up comes the biography of a CIA. I Googled my lady's name, Jerry Cobb, and CIA. And up came a similar lady named June Cobb, who was a CIA agent. I was like, oh, well, just a name thing. No big deal. No, very big deal. Because within an hour after knowing my woman's biography and hearing June Cobb's biography quickly, which is all over the web, and June Cobb was an agent. She was involved in 10,000 documents at the Kennedy assassination. I was like, who is she? And she's from Jerry's hometown. She described, her looks are somewhat like Jerry, blonde, the same age, from Ponca City, Oklahoma. Both women were in aviation. Both women wound up going in the Amazon jungle in the 1950s. Both women contacted indigenous natives in that jungle when almost no white people were down there. Well, these similarities are described in like chapter 2, and I call them the astonishing list of similarities. I'm like, how can these two women not be the same person? So I actually had to email my older lady that I'm working with and go, we need to meet. And I had to have, believe it or not, an actual conversation with a person I knew and try to figure out and just blatantly ask her, does she have a double identity? Is she a CIA agent? I mean, when I sat down after 3 weeks of review with her, I knew that she probably could not answer the questions that I had in a way that would satisfy me, because by that time it was astronomically impossible that there wasn't something going on. I had even found documents that said that June Cobb, the CIA agent, had a twin sister in aviation. Neither of them was to have a sister, but clearly there was some kind of doubling, some kind of double identity. So my life went down a crazy rabbit hole. And all my friends will attest that I was not a conspiracy person. I was not a JFK person. I was trying to do a feminist story about a really cool lady, right? And I wound up going down the rabbit hole, and here I am talking to you. So it did take me into the case because ultimately I felt by breaking open how this double identity worked, who Jerry Cobb really was. I should also mention in my confrontation with her, when I confronted her about being June Cobb, she placed herself in Dallas. The woman I was talking to and sitting with placed herself in Dallas on the day of the assassination, trying to fly away from there in a desperate flight because she was a pilot. So the story just went crazy. And that was my book. That's how it started.
Okay, so
I know that
that's crazy. So
it
you're
is.
talking to somebody in the jungle about their and confronting them about their second identity as a CIA agent. Is that do I
Well,
have that right?
she's up in America, and she's an elderly woman. I've been dealing with her for 2 years. I've been interviewing her, trying to tell the space story. I pulled the plug on doing the space movie because I realized it could very well be a cover story, partly true maybe, but some of it maybe put up there to cover her real career, which potentially I was considering was probably spying.
So did she just this is so tangential. Did she end up is she really that person that was there a woman that was doing this astronaut stuff, or is that
Well, she
not true?
actually did. I mean, there was no doubt that she had done this astronaut stuff. There are pictures in Life magazine, and that's why some of my film crew said, "Mary, maybe we should still try to do the movie." It's put in all the major, New York Times, or all the major media was covering her in her day, so she was well known.
Okay.
But so was this mountain of things that linked her to June Cobb was also undeniable, as was her response when I confronted her. She was not you think somebody might be kind of mad if you accuse them of, or you're going to have to ask that question. And she
Right.
loved that I had discovered June Cobb, who she knew a whole lot about, technically denied it kind of sort of in that conversation, but was just like a Cheshire cat who was thrilled that I had discovered June. Then our relationship changed. I ended the movie, and she invited me to travel the world and take me to all the places that June Cobb had spied. So June Cobb was and now we'll move over and talk about June Cobb because that's what took me into the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
So I started to try to piece together, well, who is June? Because June Cobb is fascinating in and of herself. She's a name in the government files, and they talk about all the spying she did. And unfortunately, she'd been overlooked for a very long time. And I came to believe she was an extremely central player in the story of the assassination, and frankly, not in a good way. So it's a very convoluted decade of my life where I went to the National Archives, collected mountains of just big piles of June Cobb documents, pieced them together chronologically, read, who her case officer, what are her spying assignments. She was on Fidel Castro at the time we were trying to kill him. And she sent materials into the assassin that we chose to get rid of him at one point. She was on some very dicey, dark operations. And that's why that all her files are out there in the Kennedy assassination saga. And then after the assassination, she harassed a witness who had seen Oswald. So when you read her file, I think researchers before me who weren't as motivated as me to figure this woman out, they just glanced at it. June Cobb, who cares? Well, and many of them were men, and many of them were men 30, 40, 50 years ago. Things have
Sure.
changed. We no longer think a woman is benign if she is steeping in a case. So we want to take a good look at her today, whereas in the 60s, we might not have looked at her. And June Cobb is troubling. So I go into, wow, she's really mixing it up in far too many places. For example, Oswald had taken his last book out of the library. It was a book that June Cobb was on the cover of, her picture. She had, which doesn't look like Jerry. I'll have to tell you more about that. But at any rate, he had a picture of June Cobb, and literally she was a translator, and she was on the dust jacket of the book that he had just taken out of the library and never returned. He has many, many ties to June Cobb, Oswald does. So obviously I got more and more interested, and I felt that I had a really important clue that I had to bring to the public.
That's incredible. So let me ask you a little bit about how so it sounds like she's got quite a world in the CIA.
Yes.
When does she start that process? When is she engaged in the CIA for the first time, or does there a record around that?
Well, I think germane to your listeners here is I know some of the nature of your podcast. And of course, what a government document says and what is the real fact
Right.
could not, maybe not be on the same page.
Correct.
So the story told in the government files is that June Cobb was a rather low level CIA employee, maybe of not little consequence, and that she was sort of recruited around 1960 and that she was on board till about 1968. I personally don't believe that she was recruited in 1960. I think she has a double identity with Jerry, and she's long been tracking back into the CIA in operations with the government in South America in the 50s. So, that's a tricky question. I think June Cobb has a lot of secrets and other operations that are not even out to the public yet.
Well, and that seems to be pretty normal too, that
Right.
there really never is this kind of this day someone joins the CIA. It's this very kind of contractor relationship and in and out. And I think they were the cowboy. It was like a cowboy world then, and
Well,
everybody was just doing whatever they wanted, and no one had to tell anybody anything.
well, and yeah, why have an alias? Oswald used aliases and
Yeah.
alter identities. So, why use an alias? Well, criminals use aliases, spies use aliases, but basically kids to get carded might use an alias. But basically, if you use it an alias, you're kind of up to a little bit of no good, right? You don't
Right.
want to have it found. And I think in the CIA, this was a tactic utilized to borrow another name. So there is another woman who later comes out as June Cobb in New York City, and she exists. And I go into the book because that was so kerflummoxing to me. Well, wait, there is this picture of this other lady, and how does that fit together? I ultimately, of course, I'm summarizing a very long
Yeah. Yeah.
investigation,
Yeah.
but I ultimately came to feel that yeah, I think if spies are going to borrow a name, are they going to make it out of whole cloth? Well, then if Russia looks into it, they might. There's no family there. There's nothing there. If they're borrowing a name prior to the internet, that's a really smooth way to go because you can go into Cuba and another name come out. And at that point, somebody else can kind of alibi you as well, right? So there's a
Sure.
real poetry in this doubling. And also, I think it's made the government be able to stick to the story. Like, oh, we'll give you one of the names she used. All these spies are using a portfolio of names. Maybe they do that today. I don't know, but that's how they used to roll. They had a bunch of names and they could pull different ones out for different assignments.
So how does she become critical to the JFK case?
Well, the most critical moment was when I confronted Jerry. That's why the book's called A Woman I Know. I mean, this is not me researching idle documents in a library. I
Right.
was dealing with her and I'm asking her questions like, oh my gosh, I have the real McCoy here. I better grill her. So I try safely. I was sort of scared of her. That's a little embarrassing to be scared of an elderly woman, I will say,
Well,
but I was. You know, I never really got to the bottom of everything, but in the first conversation, she placed herself in Dallas in a flight what sounded an awful lot like a getaway flight. And
mm,
so, and she didn't never backed off that. She stuck to that story. And the way she told it to me, that she was waiting for someone after the assassination. She had to get out of there. She had a tremendous emotion. It was almost a partial confession in some way that she was
mm.
confessing something to me many years later. So that set me on a path of like, I had a hard time reconciling the stories she told me about her being there with anything that could have been particularly good, which is also how I reviewed the June Cobb file. Is she a good guy? Is she a bad guy? And June was in so many dark operations that I pegged her to, that including assassination operations and William Harvey being one of her superiors, who was the head of the assassination program at the time for our country, trying to get rid of Castro and Lumumba. Yeah, I became very concerned what she was really doing and who June Cobb really was. And I came away with a very dark portrait of who June was after poring over her file.
So she's in Dallas. She places herself in Dallas. What's her role in that day?
I wish I could say definitively what her role is, but what I can tell you is, and I put this in the book, by far my most controversial moment in the book is at the end of the book. Everybody's looking for an additional shooter, obviously, in JFK. They think they're at the grassy knoll. They think it could be in the Daltex building. Even Congress in the 1970s had concluded another shot could have been fired. I mean, this is not that fringy anymore to postulate that there were an additional shot. So everybody's looking for that. But shockingly, okay, and I found this out when I searched. I mean, I finally searched Dealey Plaza because the story Jerry told me that her and a bunch of reporters sat out on the tarmac and didn't go in to cover the event never made sense. It made sense that somebody might have gone in. So I combed all the files, the visual data on the assassination. I looked for her. I mean, I know her. I've dealt with her vintage image like extensively. She's up on the wall of my studio and a big timeline. I really would be the best person to identify her. I looked and I combed everything, and I thought I was okay that I hadn't found her until the final shot hits Kennedy. And on several angles of the films, there's a blonde, ponytailed woman, which is what Jerry was, looks very athletic, which is what Jerry was, wearing a trench coat and a hat, and this woman, a scarf, and she's called the babushka lady. This woman was pointing a camera at Kennedy at the moment, and she was one of the closest bystanders to him. 33 feet away is what I measured. She was very close, and she was aiming intently at the moment the fatal shot hit his head. The first shot would have, hit from potentially a rifle coming the other direction. I am not a ballistics person, but I do know this. Any woman who is standing there, who we don't know who she is, she walked off Dealey Plaza. She's nicknamed the babushka because we don't know who she is. She walked away and she never became a person of interest. The film and her camera never came forward. And I was looking for a woman of Jerry's build, and she fit that bill. I cannot tell you how troubling I found that information because of these other ties that June Cobb had to Oswald, because of June Cobb's ties to having an assassination operation against Castro, which I had very clearly linked her to in chapter 7 of my book. So if she's tied to any other assassination operation, and if she has a double identity, and I'm looking for a blonde woman, why wasn't the babushka ever located? Or even did anybody care? You can Google her now, babushka lady, and she makes, there are these lists on the web of the 10 biggest mysteries of all time in our whole world, or planetary mysteries. And she's often listed as who was she? And there was a lady came out in the 70s claiming to be her, but she was very shaky. So this woman has never been identified. Well, why didn't anybody even wonder if she could have a concealed pistol, shooting any other kind of dart? I mean, who is she? Or just a spotter for the operation? I mean, or the driver for others? Who is she? Nobody ever looked at it. So I took a look, and, Jerry's out there in a plane, which I describe her story of being in this plane trying to get out of there. And, you can make it to the airport that Jerry was at in 15 or 16 minutes from Dealey Plaza. So I've been very concerned, and I've pointed a lot of other researchers to the babushka. Quite frankly, I hope I've pointed other researchers to quite a number of women who were overlooked back in the official investigations.
That's interesting to talk about. So I know that is a huge part of that particular era, is that you have this, you have a group of people who are powerful, but there's a lot of women in that story too.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think, kind of, at least from your research, why is that part of how this is all happening? Is this something because they knew they would look past it? Is it because they felt like there was a need to have, sort of the sexual aspect to it? What's happening in that?
Well, I think that they did use the sexual aspect at times. Now, that is not so. June Cobb, they often say, oh, she hit a lot of beds in Cuba and this and that. I have found very little strong support of who, if she was doing that, what's going on. The woman I know, Jerry Cobb, was more of that action woman she was a marksman, she's a pilot. She doesn't seem like the hit a lot of beds in Cuba type, the woman I know, but you are looking at a double identity. Sure. So I would say if somebody was smart in the Cold War and was looking to conceal an operation, and they're in the CIA, the women might not make it up to the top of the agency back then. That if somebody was smart enough to see a weapon and mobilize a woman who could go below the radar, one could go in there and nobody's going to really think she could fly a plane, for example, to get out of there. Nobody's going to think she's a marksman. Back then, they didn't assume that a woman could do any of that. So the Russians knew that, and the Russians were mobilizing some women. And I think we were also aware that the Russians were doing that, right? Because there's, the whole Cold War thing.
Yep.
So I think there's that. But I do think at times women were used as lures by the CIA to pull in leaders and compromise. We hear about that today in the news, right? Potentially. So I think there's, as old as men and women, those things have happened. But maybe a little newer is the idea of mobilizing a woman back then who would be invisible.
One of the things that I have been kind of enamored with this case, and it's really just more because of politics. I come from the back, like I like today's politics, and I'm moving backwards into when did this politics stuff in the United States become so corrupt and dark? And, I feel like a lot of things, at least in its modern iteration, fall to that November day. I mean, I think that's really quite a tragedy in America, where you have the open assassination of the head of state in broad daylight, clearly by the agencies, and, a lot of other things, LBJ. There's a lot of different connections in all of this. I'm really curious, as you've kind of gone back and to talk to these folks that are from that time, would there have been, what's the sense from your research or thoughts? Is there a motive that these folks are willing to sort of set down their Americanism or their patriotism, or do they just really conflate those two things, that the assassination of a head of state that they did not like is being the most patriotic version of themselves?
Great question. Nobody's asked me that, because I was dealing with Jerry Cobb, who I'm certain is in espionage, and how many dark arts. I can't peg her to being the babushka. I can't say for sure exactly what she did, but boy, she once told me when we were having a deep discussion about American politics that she felt that America had lost its guts. And for her, it was the guts of things like being able to drop an atomic bomb or doing what needed to be done to save the country. Now that, in a very twisted way, could be someone who objected to Kennedy and wanted to get, by no stretch am I saying that I support that in any way, but I think this is the mindset that could be present for some, in that I think there was a very hard line group of people who was by the ends justified the means. I don't think it was a large group who would be in the know, by the way. Some of these stories and books, I think they say, are large conspiracy. It might be smaller when the people who are really knowledgeable and who are actionable, because, you don't want it to be too big. But I totally agree with you. The Kennedy assassination specifically was seminal in the word conspiracy theory, or the phrase was born then. And it was actually born in many ways through the CIA's effort to discredit anybody who questioned the official story. How sad is that? And I get really, we all love to hear about aliens and all sorts of interesting, fun topics. And some of them are, serious. Somebody spotted something and it's important to look at that. And then there's some, there's the wacky stuff. And you hate to see legit conversations of where maybe our government went off the rails, conflated with the absolute wackiest thing that's ever said out there, right? Because there's a lot of sane things to be said. And we didn't just lose Kennedy. It was RFK Jr., Martin Luther King. A lot of deaths were happening, and they're not the only ones. There were some witnesses in the Kennedy assassination who mysteriously die in the investigative years that I don't know if that's been looked at closely. A lot of dark arts were going on, as well as known things that were going on. So I think, we went off the rails and the Kennedy assassination. And if our government wasn't honest and forthcoming about that, it's a little bit like the original sin that just keeps on giving. And I don't look at everything our government does. I think there's some good folks who sign up to even be in our CIA and wherever, that go in to be patriotic and protect us. However, is there enough accountability? Is there the proper oversight? And all these are very important questions. And if they don't go back, if we're still having trouble releasing some of the Kennedy files, most of them came out. But maybe the listeners don't realize there's still a group of files that still didn't come out, even with all this push with the committees. And hopefully they will soon. And I know the current administration wants them to. But why is that happening in 2025? It's crazy.
Everybody's dead. It's so
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
It really is so wild.
So, but
You
I
know,
would also add that right after World War II was another inflection point that I think that our
mm,
country got out of World War II. The bomb had been dropped. So there's a little that leads into the Kennedy assassination. So you could, both of those moments were both seminal, I think, in, because we always think of World War II as being quite virtuous, trying to
sure.
take out, the world, the Nazis and the terrible fight in Europe. And most Americans can think back and feel some pride when we celebrate some of those days where, D-Day with our soldiers running across.
Sure.
But then the Cold War was a very murkier, different animal.
Is there anything, speaking of the newest files,
Yeah.
is there anything in them that sort of points to some answers surrounding this particular woman and the sort of world that was happening? Is there anything in there that you've seen or found that is kind of intriguing?
Well, I did find a document that was more confirmative than revelatory, where it basically talks about June Cobb and her covert tax forms, and how, hey, if June doesn't get her papers in really soon, like we need them yesterday, we're going to have to tell the IRS her true covert, her actual name. We'll have to move on that. So they were doing a covert doubling tax form, and that new document came out, which basically I already had, though, that she had 2 social security numbers. I already had that, I had so much, right? So, but it was nice to see that confirmation. I think about it. They're never going to put certain things to paper, and government files are not written in that way. And they still aren't today. They're not candid. They don't tell what's really going on to a great extent. And they're written with a lot of CYA and just certain facts. And we don't need to go to these other facts. So, I never expected the big smoking gun papers to come out. I do, however, expect all these papers that just came out have tons of clues for researchers like myself to go back and piece more puzzle pieces. So
Right.
the news that comes out that the files didn't have that much, that's because they all need a lot of work. They're not told candidly. But I believe
You
they
mean the New
actually do.
York Times is lazy? I can't believe it.
Yeah, that news cycle is a killer. And if it doesn't make a snappy headline right away, the attention span moves really quickly off. You probably, though, did hear about the one about Joanides. They did nail the cover up that the CIA was really, I can't say blatantly lying would be the only way to say that when, they put Joanides, George Joanides, an agent who was involved in the circle that they were monitoring about Oswald prior to the assassination. And then they put him as a liaison to help the investigations, navigate the documents and get the story right in the 70s. Well, those 2 wires can't cross, right? You can't have the guy who's helping out. And then they concealed and lied about his former ties to Oswald. So that has come out, and that is pretty much nailed down at this point, thanks to Jefferson Morley, who really pushed that find forward.
So a couple more questions for you that I'm sort of intrigued by. The Oswald connection.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? What's happening there?
Oswald is his own. I mean, I was just on the phone with a researcher yesterday. That people have very strong opinions about Oswald. Did he actually shoot the shot? Has he been doubled? He used aliases? There's entire books about that. There are, some people think it was a sole shooter. Some people still think the lone nut theory is viable. I think that one's on its last legs. But some people stick up for that one. There's just so many views on Oswald, and he is complicated. With his trip to Russia and everything. Sure. I landed on the fact that, he looked like he had a lot of ties to intelligence prior to the assassination, and those have never been come out. And that, I think, is going to be important if we ever are able to bird dog exactly what the government knew and how they probably used him on that Russian trip that he was over there. That, to me, is very, very important and very shrouded in mystery. And you just don't see any documents on it. Well, it's obvious our government cared about that. So to me, that's like ground zero of where Oswald's story needs to be looked at.
And how does he interface uh, on that day in Dallas and with these other characters that are around and how is that what are you seeing in that in terms of like yeah, just that's an interesting piece of this too,
It's
I guess.
very interesting. I didn't give Oswald the deep dive. I mean, the literally like the 10, 12-year dive I did on June Cobb and what her role was. I did look at all her connections to Oswald. But like I said, I kind of went a little bit agnostic in my book
Mhm.
as to exactly what Oswald's role was. I mean, like I said, some people feel he's doubled. I think my look at a double identity should give additional researchers a really good, full spectrum look at Oswald with my new information. But personally, and this is controversial, this is where you split off with some people who feel strongly. I think Oswald probably was involved in intelligence early, and that's why he was in Russia. Now, how witting was he? How much was he used? Was he a deeper agent, or was he kind of a younger guy that was used in some way? Those are all nuances that I'm not sure I'm ready to answer in the slightest because there's so little
Sure.
information. But then, was he claimed to be a patsy? I trended not to think so much. But that takes me away from a lot of researcher, and I am by no means set on that theory. But my sense of it is if he went over to Russia as one of them, were they going to turn on him and frame him if he was one of them? And my sense of the culture, these are just guesses. My sense of the culture is I haven't seen enough that would prove to me that they did, that he might not have, maybe something went wrong on the day of that, his getting arrested. Maybe he panicked a bit, possibly. I don't discount that he could have been doubled at times during an
Hmm.
operation. So, yeah, I'm not ready to go on the deep dive record on Oswald, but I think Oswald is a puzzle. I think actually there's more fruit to be had going after some of the ancillary characters where there's just more to
Right.
look at, like June Cobb.
Right. So June in Cuba is an interesting thing, and
Mm,
I keep connecting this moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy's willingness to let that play out, not go aggressively, full hawkish, all the stuff that
yeah.
the LeMays and the rest of the world wanted to do. And I think that just finally sets the course for them to say, this is not the person we need in charge of this because the world's too precarious.
Yeah.
You talk about June being in Cuba. You talk about her
Mm.
being a part of this kind of Fidel assassination stuff. Is that one of the motives potentially is that she's been so involved in this Cuba conversation that she says, okay, it's time and I'll be involved in this too? Or I mean, I don't know that they always kind of willingly go along with it or
Yes.
stand up to it, but tell me a little bit about that because I think that's kind of an interesting piece.
It's where the whole ball game is. I do think that there was a group of people like the hardcores, like you mentioned, Curtis LeMay, but there were people like that within the CIA itself, and people who had the wherewithal. If there's a secret program that knows how to assassinate a leader or is trying to develop that capability to assassinate a foreign leader like Castro, and the whole idea is you're going to walk away from that killing, right? The most important part of killing somebody like that, which I've learned following these documents, isn't just to get rid of the guy. It's the dominoes must fall in the proper direction afterwards. You can't just kill the
Mm.
guy and then have all the bad vibe come back to your country. You have to frame somebody else and walk away from it, and preferably frame your enemy in some way. So you want that aftermath and everything that's going to happen after assassination to go away from you and at your enemy. That's the important part of this, right? And that's exactly what, if there are people who have devised a way to accomplish that, that's a very dangerous skill to have if they started to think that Kennedy was not hawkish enough on Cuba. And June Cobb, in her CIA file, I discovered she was writing a speech for Kennedy days before the election, and she submitted it to his speechwriters. I've proven this with my footnotes, not just Mary Haverstick's thing. It's in my book, Chapter 8. And you can find those documents where she was submitting it and in contact with his speechwriter, Richard Goodwin, and it was trying to move Kennedy to a more aggressive position on an overthrow of Castro.
Mm.
And he didn't do what June Cobb wanted. She submitted it, and how much clout she had. He didn't go there. The speechwriter then put it into one of his position papers, went to the New York Times, and Kennedy retracted it. He said he
Hmm.
didn't. So that almost looks to me like a test of Kennedy's position. I think surely we already doesn't take a soothsayer to know that the CIA, who was planning Castro's demise and advocating for it, wanted the president to go with their plan. They had the Bay of Pigs lined up. They had
Right.
possible assassination. So they wanted rid of Castro. If Kennedy came in with cold feet on that, sure, that looks like a motive. Because I think in the Cold War, again, not advocating it, but in the era that I do remember as a little girl, where the fallout shelter signs were up, because we
Right.
could get, a nuclear bomb dropped on us, that people were scared and leaders were scared. So maybe they felt like, if they didn't get rid of this threat across the island there, that we were in peril. That was the thinking. And if Kennedy didn't have the guts to do it, it could feel existential, especially to people who were like Curtis LeMay, really military guys that wanted to blast them, So, and then Jerry specifically told me America's lost its guts. And I
Yeah.
think that's what she meant, that she felt that we didn't do what was necessary. And when she says necessary is a little different than what I'd say was necessary. Maybe what you'd say is, I don't know.
That's
So,
for
so
sure
there's that.
different than what I would say.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think a little different. So, and this is the creepy part. Whether you agree with anything on the Kennedy assassination, it's proven that our country had a little program going to try to assassinate several world leaders that we'd authorized, Patrice Lumumba and Fidel Castro specifically, and possibly more. So if we
Yeah.
have a program and a capability, they always downplay that it wasn't very far along. If
Mhm.
that's not true and we had a capability, in whose hands, and if they were able to be so covert and hidden, who should have that capability in the hands of a small group? That seems wrong. That
Right.
seems like something can get out of control. And that is the theory of my book.
Yeah. So another thing in your book, tell me what, as you got through this, I mean, there's a lot of surprises for sure.
Yeah.
Is there one that you went, this is unreal? Like, how did we get here?
Whoa. Well, the biggest one the biggest one starts at the top, which I've already told you. The biggest one was Jerry telling me she was at the Redbird Airport and telling me the story of flying away and trying to desperately get out of there. When I had kind of guessed, I'd heard of this plane story that there was a plane on the runway there. And I thought it matched what I knew to be Jerry's plane. So I was pegging her with a question. And when she placed herself there with that amount of motion, I have to tell you, it's almost PTSD. Like when I think about that conversation, it was so intense.
Mm.
It was with a person I know. It was not reading a document. I'm sitting with somebody. I'm confronting her. I'm trying to do her movie. I'm trying to tell her, before this, I think she's a complete hero fighting for women's
Right.
rights, being a cool astronaut, being a cool pilot. Come on. And now I'm like sitting with her in this double identity thing. And then she places herself in Dallas in that day in a precarious place with the double identity. I mean, there's no moment in my entire life that will compare to that moment.
No, no.
And it's crazy. I was like, and by the way, I never thought this was not a good career move to investigate JFK
No.
for how long. I had a movie going with cool actresses, jumping at this part. And, then I detoured over to this wacky story. So it was I feel very fortunate I got the book out and it got a good publisher, but that was by no means a given.
The guy that at the end here that sort of tips you off to have this, hey, maybe this isn't the real story. What do you think the motive there was? Is that just a friend doing something nice, or was this like, hey, there's something here you shouldn't be looking at?
I have always thought it was the latter. It was a female agent I met by what I thought was happenstance. She was very quick to tell me she was in espionage, and she actually kind of, in some ways, I've wondered about that. I've wondered about that, and I cannot be sure. So we're really getting into guesswork. But obviously, that's how they do it, right? If they drop some information, they drop it, walk away, and you never know, and they can never be tied to it. I liked her. I could be snookered. I could be, I only knew her for 3 weeks. I mean, it was somebody I had a very brief acquaintanceship, but it was a budding friendship. I came to the conclusion that she might have been tipping me off. Maybe there's somebody, maybe she was, she clearly helped me not do a story that would have been wrong. She clearly helped me not put my name on a film that would have been a cover story. She clearly guided, the way that it nudged me and I went in a different direction. It put me on the trail of seeking a truth. Oh my gosh. I had such a naive view of government prior. I was happy about NASA. I thought Apollo 11 was awesome, and now, I delved into the investigation about a double identity, the CIA, the Kennedy thing. And I wouldn't say I'm jaded, but I definitely, the scales have fallen from my eyes and I see it all very, very differently now. And that's thanks to her, because I think it's more accurate than my prior, almost childlike view, which was probably from my childhood. I mean, I think those of us who grew up in the 60s, man, that astronaut thing and going to the moon was pretty darn cool.
Pretty
Every single
cool.
one of us
Yeah.
had the models and oh man. So yeah, that she did me a favor.
Last question for you. I'm curious, as you've gone through this, you kind of alluded to it here at the end, but how has this changed your view of government? How has it changed your view of kind of the mythology of America, which is this sort of free society stuff?
Yeah.
I kind of constantly say, hey, we all hold up our Constitution and wave it, but no one's listening.
These times are so
How's it changed
divided.
you?
I mean, things are so difficult right now. We all know that, things are, family members not talking to each other. I mean, things have been so tough right now across our population. It's been a tough time.
Yeah.
But I definitely, I obviously am going to view it with more skepticism. I'm obviously going to view the things that we're told with a lot more skepticism, and that also includes the media. And I'm not one to totally bash the media. I've held a camera. I've been a person on the side.
Yeah.
I have a lot more skepticism. I can see through things more quickly, more clearly than I used to. That includes news stories. That includes government stuff. Obviously, every president that gets in wants to tout their good news. I mean,
Of course.
it's human nature and it crosses the parties. But I will say this. I also believe, and I'm still not going to let go. I'm not going to let go of the belief that there's some good people that sign up for the CIA, that there's good people for run for office, that there are good citizens who are trying to cast their best vote. I'm not going to go down in the cynical hole and just go completely negative, or that we can't mend some of the fences that our country has seen. I'm just not ready to go negative on my final answer as to where we're headed. But I definitely take everything with a grain of salt. What do they say? Trust but verify.
Yeah.
It might come from Ronald Reagan, but it's no less true.
Still true.
It's a good practice.
Still true.
Yeah.
Tell people a little bit about the book. Where can they get it? How can it be ordered? What's the title? And what's
thank you.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah, they've got a cool cover. That's Jerry. She's flying her plane while she's smoking. And why we chose it for the cover partly was because, she's supposed to be so goody two shoes, like in such wonderful shape. And there's no sign of smoking and drink. And, and here she is. She's such a cowgirl. She's rock'em sock'em. So it's a woman I know. It is really, truly available pretty much everywhere.
Okay.
We got a really good distribution. The Barnes and Nobles of the world have it. The Amazons have it. It's a Kindle. I did an audio book, which I think has done pretty well. It's even out there in French, if anybody's wanting to read it in French. So it's gotten pretty good distribution. Always glad to get new readers. But I think a quick Google will get you there.
Awesome. Mary, it's just a wonderful conversation. So fun to talk to people who are in this world, because I think it's just, I said it in this episode, but I think this is the critical moment for me anyway, one of the most critical moments of the 20th century, in which I feel like we really did, at least the scales came off of the eyes, that the government that we live under is not the one we suppose rests in the National Archives under argon glass. It's just a very different world. And it happens here. It happens in the midst of a really tragic moment. That's the destruction of a life and a bright future, and sort of maybe somebody wanting more peace and wanting more of the original intent behind a free society. And it's an unfortunate episode in our world. And I think not enough people have asked enough questions about it. To have a secondary character like this, who actually becomes a really critical part to this discussion, that means nobody's asked the right questions about a number of these people. And I think that's an important piece of it. So I appreciate you doing that.
Well, Aaron, thank you for keeping these conversations going, not just about JFK, but all the tough conversations that people need to be having these days. So it's great to see.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we'll get this out, and appreciate your time. And yeah, do you have a website or anything? If people have questions about it, is there anything like that, or is it just the book?
Womaniknow.com has a little more information about specifically about the book. So there's a little bit deeper dive. It's not a woman there; it's just womaniknow.com. So that is a little bit more info in the book.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for being with us, and we'll see you out there again.
Thanks, Aaron.